On Thursday, Austria welcomed controversial British Home Secretary or Interior Minister Suella Braverman, who has made headlines with her hardline rhetoric on migration issues. The aim is to promote the outsourcing of asylum applications to third countries using the British experience. Like Austria, Great Britain is working on processing asylum applications abroad. However, a controversial agreement with Rwanda in this regard is currently still subject to legal review. Great Britain has a lot of experience when it comes to carrying out asylum procedures outside Europe in the future, praised Austrian Interior Minister Gerhard Kahner to the Austrian press agency APA before the meeting. The idea has gained traction recently, and Germany is also considering kind of such an approach. Since more and more countries are following the Austrian line, as the Austrian Interior Ministry emphasized on Tuesday, expanded third country cooperation should also be able to be implemented with the Asylum and Migration Act, they said. And they say, we will continue to work consistently to ensure that the EU Commission advances such asylum procedures outside Europe and thereby makes them possible. The agreement between Great Britain and Rwanda is particularly interesting for Austria, and they say that could serve as a model for the EU, at least according to the Interior Ministry. I don't think so. Under the new rules, people identified by the UK as illegal migrants or asylum seekers can be deported to Rwanda for processing. If their application is successful, they would be granted asylum there and will not be allowed to re-enter the UK. And there's the problem. And the plan is considered highly controversial. The country's Supreme Court is currently considering its legality after an appeals court ruled it unlawful. And the European Court of Human Rights had also previously intervened. Suella Braverman, the UK Home Secretary, has proposed this controversial plan to send the asylum seekers who arrive in the UK illegally to this East African country. And the plan has been met with widespread criticism from human rights groups and opposition politicians who argue that it is inhumane and illegal. But let's talk about this Rwanda plan. Asylum seekers who arrive in the UK illegally would be flown to Rwanda, where they would be processed and have their asylum claims assessed. If successful, they would be granted refugee status in Rwanda and would be allowed to stay there indefinitely. If unsuccessful, they would be returned to their country of origin or any other country of their choosing. And Braverman has argued that the Rwanda plan is necessary to deter people from making dangerous journeys across the English Channel in those small boats. And she has also said that it will break the business model of traffickers or people smugglers who charge large sums of money to transport people to the UK. However, critics of the plan have argued that it is a violation of the UK's international obligations under the Refugee Convention. And they also have said that it is likely to have a deterrent effect on people who are fleeing war and persecution, as it will make it more difficult for them to reach safety. The Rwanda plan has been challenged in the courts, as I said, and it's currently unclear whether it will be able to go ahead at all. The government has said that it is committed to the plan, but it is facing significant legal and political opposition. And there are some of the key arguments for and against the Rwanda plan I got for you. In favor of the plan, as they say, it would deter people from making dangerous journeys across the English Channel. And it would break the business model of the traffickers or people smugglers, and it would encourage people to apply for asylum through legal routes. But where are those? And they say it will save the UK money on asylum costs. But there are also a lot of arguments against the plan. It is a violation of the UK's international obligations under the Refugee Convention. And it's likely to have a deterrent effect on people who are fleeing war and persecution, as I mentioned earlier. It will be expensive and time-consuming to implement as well. and it will damage the UK's reputation on human rights. So this Rwanda plan remains a controversial and divisive issue. It is unclear whether they will be able to go ahead, as I said, and it's likely to continue to be debated for some time to come. The Rwanda plans have been criticized for violating the Geneva Refugee Convention in several ways. There is the principle of non-refoulement, for example. The Refugee Convention prohibits states from returning refugees to countries where they fear persecution. The Rwanda plan would send asylum seekers to Rwanda, even if they have a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country, and the right to seek asylum. The Refugee Convention guarantees the right of refugees to seek asylum in another country. And the Rwanda plan would make it more difficult for asylum seekers to reach the UK, and it could discourage them from seeking asylum altogether. And people have a right to a fair asylum process. The Refugee Convention requires states to provide asylum seekers with a fair and impartial asylum process. The Rwanda plan has been criticized for lacking adequate safeguards to ensure that asylum seekers receive a fair hearing. And in addition to the specific violations of the Refugee Convention, the Rwanda plans have also been criticized for being inhumane and for failing to provide adequate protection for refugees. For example, the UNHCR has expressed concern that refugees in Rwanda would face limited access to basic necessities, including food, shelter, healthcare, and education. The UK government has defended the Rwanda plans, arguing that they are necessary to deter people from making dangerous journeys across the English Channel, as I said before. However, the plans have been met with widespread opposition from human rights groups, legal experts, and even opposition politicians. And we still don't know how it goes on when they are challenged in the courts now, and we will see if they will be able to go ahead at all. But the European Union's plans for external asylum processing have been the subject of much debate as well, as you see with the Austrians, with some arguing that they would violate international law as well. But there are a number of key differences between the EU plans and the UK's plans for external asylum processing that suggests that the EU plans may be more likely to be considered lawful in the end. And one of the key principles of the international refugee law is non-refoulement, as I said, which prohibits states from returning refugees to countries where they fear persecution. The EU plans have been carefully designed to ensure that they do not violate the principle of non-refoulement. And it's the same with the other requirements. For example, the EU plans include a number of safeguards to ensure that asylum seekers are not returned to countries where they would fear persecution, such as the requirement that asylum seekers be given a fair and impartial asylum process and the right to appeal negative decisions. And they would come into the EU if successful. And in contrast, the UK's plans for external asylum processes have been criticized for violating the principle of non-refoulement, as I said. And there is one big difference. People sent from the UK to Rwanda would have to stay in Rwanda even if their asylum claim is successful. And that is definitely unlawful. They have a right to be in the country where they applied for asylum. If the EU plans go through like they are discussed at the moment, there might be the processing in another country, but the successful ones would be taken into the EU because they claimed asylum in the EU. And that is the difference, why one thing is violating international law and the other thing isn't. So you have to have a look at the small print everywhere to see what's really going on. It's not a problem to process asylum claims in a third country in the first place, but what you do after that process, that makes a big difference. And if you want to know something else, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.